Now, we'll write a function that works with the data in the treatstoday.txt file. This function we're going to write is called getTreatList. It takes a single parameter called treatData, which has type text.io. The type text.io is a file that is already open for reading. That means it is not a file name, it's an open file that we can already begin to read from. This function will return a list of lists with information from the file. We have an example here in the docstring. Typically, we won't provide docstring examples for functions that take an open file. However, we'll do it now just so we can use it to help us understand what this function needs to do. So in the docstring example, we see that the input file is opened and set to have a variable called input file refer to it. It is passed to the getTreatList function. It produces a list, and then the file is closed. Wherever the file is opened, it's the responsibility of that part of code to also close the file. If we look at the result from getTreatList, we see that we have 5 lists inside our larger list. Each one has the name of a pet and a number. If we check back to our treats today file, we can see that those numbers are equal to the number of treats that each pet received in this file. Now let's write the code to implement this function. First of all, we want to accumulate a list, so we'll create a new list variable called result to store our results in. We're also not going to use the for_line_and_file approach here. For_line_and_file works well when we want to do the same thing with every line. In this case, though, we'll want to do something different when we see a pet name versus when we see a number representing a number of treats. So what we'll do here is we'll use a combination of a while loop and the readLine method for files. So we'll start off by reading a line from the file. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to read the file line by line until we finish. So we will say while our line is not equal to the empty string. This will allow us to keep reading the file. When we try to read from an empty file, or from a file where we've already read all the lines, we get the empty string returned. So this will mean we'll keep reading the file until we reach the end of the file. As we read, the first line in the file is going to be a pet name. So let's store that line with another variable, pet name, that aliases the same string. For each pet, we also want to keep track of a total number of treats. That's going to start off at 0 before we start reading, and we will add to it for each pet. Then, once we've set up our initial variables for each pet, its name and its total treats starting at 0, we want to read the next line of the file. At this point, the first line we've read is a pet name. But now we're going to start reading lines from the file until we encounter another pet name. So we'll read the next line. We'll use this same line of code here to do that. And that will give us the next line of the file. At this point, we have one of two cases. Line can either be a number representing a number of treats, or line can be not a number representing a pet name. So if it's a number, we want to continue to read those numbers until we run out of numbers and we get a new name or the end of the file. So we can represent that with another while loop. We can say while line.isDigit. Remember that line is a string, and we have the string method isDigit, which can tell us if it's numbers. We'll make the assumption here that our file is properly formatted in that it only contains pet names and numbers of treats, which are integers. As we read a number, we want to add it to the number of treats that pet has received today. Remember that when we read in from a file, we actually get a string. But what we want to do is add up numbers. So we're going to convert that value, that number that's a string, to an int, and then add it to total treats. Then we'll move on and read the next line in the file. At this point, we go back to the top of that while loop. If line still refers to a number, we'll add that number to the total treats and read the next line. That will continue until we read a new pet name or reach the end of the file. Whether we read a new pet name or reach the end of the file, to leave the loop, we'll want to now take the data we've read for that pet and add it to our result. So in this case, we will say result.append, and we'll append a list containing those two items we're supposed to return, the pet name and the total number of treats. At this point, our code will go back up to the outer while loop, and if the line is not the empty string, that is, we've read a name, the loop will continue for each additional pet. When we do reach the end of the file, we'll want to finish our function by returning the result. Let's test out this code in the shell to make sure it works correctly. So we can see that when we open the treats today file and call getTreatList with that file, we get 5 inner lists inside our returned list with Chairman and 8, Gilbert and 7, Lowry and 7, Fluffy 0, and Tuna 4. One last thing before we finish, we need to make sure we close the file. And now we have finished writing this function.